Hi, I'm Lynne Sachs, and I'm the curator of the Cryptofiction program, Four Directions at the Same Time, a cinematic journey of introspection. And I really couldn't be more honored to introduce you to the four filmmakers whose work you will be able to watch or you have already watched on the Cryptofiction streaming service. It's really a joy for me to put together this program. I have a love for films that I think speak to the same kind of impulse that poetry does. And I am equally enamored by what happens when distinct films come together into room in the way that paintings come together in a gallery show or sculptures do, and they create a frisson or they challenge one another. And that was my plan here, was to choose four films that really had parallel impulses, but also could bring up differences in approaches and the relationship to the medium. And so I'm really looking forward to talking with each of these artists. And I will ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell you where they live and the name of their film. So let's start with Sean Hanley, and then you can pass it on to someone else, Sean.
Hi, my name is Sean Hanley. I'm a cinematographer and director living and working in New York City. I'll pass it to Tiff.
And you made the Whelming Sea.
Oh, yes, and I made the Whelming Sea.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm Tiff. I am from Southern California originally, a town called Redlands, but I currently live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I made the film Declarations of Love. And I'll pass it to Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Shappis. I'm living back in New York City after a detour to Pittsburgh, which my film No More Room in Hell is about, and I'll go to Erica.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Erica and currently in LA, California, and live in New York for 4 years before I moved here. And then before that, I originally was growing up in Taiwan, and I made the film Grandma's Sisters.
So I'm going to start with a specific question or a provocation, but then we're going to just let it go from there. For me, one of the things that distinguishes an experimental film is its search for its own visual language. So the fact that the film can't rely on any particular models or paradigms for how a film should be constructed. It rarely begins with a script. It's like this, the writing, if you have writing, or the structure comes out of the medium, and the medium itself is responding to the content. So I was wondering if each of you could talk about those initial moments before you made the film, and then and what your intention was in terms of your exploration and how the medium met you in its form.
And give it a go. I started filming I was filming for about 2.5 years before I finished the film. And it was a thesis film in school, and I had just come to filmmaking when I started to shoot my dad. Actually, I started to just practice because I had the camera for a summer for the first time. And so I think my progression in these different ways of approaching formally making the film was kind of what I was learning these years of my life. And I started in this kind of verite mode, but I was kind of tackling a very fraught relationship that I had had with my father growing up. And so it was almost like a camera as weapon, as a defense, as a reason to have certain kinds of encounters with him that without a camera I wouldn't otherwise have had or pushed myself to do. And then it kind of didn't feel like enough. So I started to, or it didn't feel like it was cohering into the film as I felt it or I saw it. And I started to play around with fiction and kind of working with him as an actor. And I like moved away from this impulse to kind of weaponize the camera, and it became more of a collaboration where I would set up certain scenarios and they would play out, and I kind of started to construct the film that way. And then kind of very, very late in the edit, it found these kind of passages that still are a mystery to me, actually, as to how I feel they kind of proceed from one to the other. But it did fall into a place that kind of felt right. And with the home video, kind of home archive material that he shot of my sisters and I. So yeah, that's kind of how it progressed.
I can also answer it, especially after Tip's film, because it's also about family. And so the initial moment was because I was been collecting like diary film footage, just like always collecting them, um and it was actually, and those footage are all like shot on Super 8, and then actually it was like during the pandemic, and I was like, because you always, you clean during the pandemic, and I realized, oh, I have all this footage I haven't processed. So I sent it to process and scan, got a scan back, and I watched it and realized there's like a lot of very strong emotion like hit back to me. And then and I also, so there were some footage was shot like when I visited back Taiwan when my grandma passed away, and then there are some like yeah, there's some footage of after that. So it's kind of so that emotion hit me, that kind of wanting to make something to remember her, and then like also try to like find all the connection we have, like how like the childlike quality of as a granddaughter and like as a grandma, which sometimes I think we share a lot of like quality of being a children and being children, and then how like her craft, how I feel like maybe the way I have confidence in my art is probably like passed on by her. So it's kind of like wrap up the film, like kind of make a organize, or like yeah, make the film that from that. Yeah.
I'm actually glad you brought attention to this one theme that you and Tiff share, this aspect of using the camera to think about your intimacy and also your distance, because the closeness is by fact of being a child or a grandchild, but then the distance you have to find as you're making the film. You have to think about how it works as an entity. And it also came to my mind that Rebecca and Sean were doing something that I thought was quite similar, just in context, which was finding a relationship to a city. What is it to be in a metropolis? This is so big, but I'm going to carve out something that's very, very exciting to me, and others might not have noticed it or thought about it in the way that I have. There's millions of people here, but this is my point of view. So that's just something I want to talk about maybe later, but I was Sean and Rebecca, you can continue this conversation around form.
Yeah, sure. I think like another thing that I saw between the four films was like the different ways of using language, or how language manifests in each film seems to have a very distinct tone, I guess, or like mode. And so I feel like my entry point into this film was through language, and all the language that you see in the film is material from scripts. So I was going to George Romero's archive as a way to think about myself as a filmmaker in Pittsburgh, a city that I'm not from but was living in. And then yeah, just was using that as a form to like reimagine a zombie narrative and a contemporary version of that city. Like, what's my zombie narrative about up this place?
Rebecca, just in
Yeah.
case there are people watching the film from watching our conversation from other countries, could you just give a little background as to who George Romero is?
Oh, sure, sure, yeah. So yeah, George Romero is thought of as like the grandfather of specifically the American cinematic zombie. So like the first film to have a American cinematic zombie to appear in it in 1968 is Romero's Night of the Living Dead, which was filmed right outside of Pittsburgh.
Thank you. He has many claims to fame, but that's one of them. And I just wanted to be sure to give a shout out on that.
Um, yeah, if I think I feel like my film might be the longest since I've made it. Like or no, maybe we were shooting in 2019 as well. I started. It's crazy to think that it's been about 4 or 5, like 5 years since I've made it, but almost 4 or 5 years. But anyways, um, so when I think back to those initial moments before the film was made, it it actually goes back to a short that I made in 2011, where I spent 2 nights on the beach that appears in the Whelming Sea. It's called Plum Beach, and it's pretty much almost between Brooklyn and Queens, along the Belt Parkway, close to the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, in New York City. And I had spent 2 nights on the beach shooting 100 feet of 16 millimeter over the course of those 2 nights, because I was invited out to witness the horseshoe crab spawn way back in 2011. And I had this idea of shooting it on 16 and using an animation motor to do these long exposures, and sort of expose by ambient city light and moonlight. And so each exposure for each frame was like about a minute long. So it took me like 2 days to film just 2 minutes of that 16 millimeter. And then that became a short called Living Fossil. And I thought, okay, so I've sort of made this very, very short film about my experience of the horseshoe crab spawn in New York. And now it sort of stuck with me until I was in a graduate program, and I was thinking like, I want to sort of expand the project. And then that initial idea became the Whelming Sea. And I think that a lot of the language of the film, or the visual language of the film, came from just spending a lot of time on the beaches without the camera. You can go and visit the beach, and witness the spawn by yourself, but I think another way to experience it is what you see in the film, which is through the count by the Audubon Society. And so you sort of have this human element that, dons their big waders or knee-high boots to go out and wade through the surf and count the crabs. And so I sort of spent time as a volunteer doing the crab count, and sort of learning the rhythms and what to expect. I did that for a year before, one season before, and then went and shot it the previous year. And I think the last thing I'll say in terms of the way that I approached the film early on was I was also doing a lot of reading of nature writing, like by Rachel Carson. She wrote a lot about, aside from Silent Spring, she also wrote about her experiences on the shoreline of the coast of Maine. And then she also wrote a book called Under the Sea Wind, which was at the time kind of a really radical bit of nature writing, where it's all written from these anthropomorphized creatures that she spent time sort of studying. And at the time, it's sort of, my understanding was that it kind of freaked people out because it, you know, usually there was this like removal of our perspective, or removal of like sort of trying to enter the perspective of the other, or like in nature writing it was supposed to be objective, but she sort of popularized this idea of maybe like trying to put yourself in another species mindset and kind of write from their perspective. So it's this really interesting book where she writes from the perspective of like 3 or 4 different creatures. And so that kind of was what sparked the initial like approach to the film.
Okay, well, I have another question unless somebody else has a question. I wanted to ask you something about about audiences and what you've learned about your film that you didn't know was there, or what you had hoped there was there and somehow it wasn't. But as we know, in our practice as makers of things that actually need an audience in some ways, and they need the breath, they need the eyes, the ears to kind of find their way in the world. Maybe it's an audience of one, but an audience. And this is a streaming experience, so we don't really get to see the audience, but I want to still recognize how important live audiences are. You know, it could be as small as sort of a or wow, but it could also be the conversation after the film, or the fact that something you didn't realize is funny, or you know, you never occurred to you that it was. But those kind of things that happen when you have the synapse that sparks between the screen and the eyes and ears of your audience. So I was wondering if you could talk about some of those moments that have occurred. Erica, I see your nod, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, I did have a little funny moment with the screening. Was I because I didn't realize how playful some of my cinematography is, especially playing with like focus shift and things like that. And it did somewhat like I would hear people like wow, like kind of like, I don't know, have expression during that, and they'll come to me. It's like, oh my God, is that how you shot it? Oh, okay, I don't want to know, because they actually had fun engaging with my cinematography. They're just like a funny moment with that. And it's, yeah, this is something that I didn't thought of it, because for me it was kind of like you know, like trying to like expressing, or like like figure out what I feel with like my grandma, and I am trying to like remembering her, but then I didn't realize the playfulness in that. And I really appreciate that people remind me of, like, you know, when you were shooting, you actually were like playing. So yeah.
Let me ask you one more thing related to that, that maybe other people want to address. All of you have used film, 16 millimeter or Super 8 in your lives, and actually have a pretty profound connection to that apparatus, and to the analog, and to the touch of film. So I was wondering, Eric, if you could talk about, as you were shooting your film, how you were like how the camera sort of channeled somehow a connection with your grandmother.
Right. I want to say maybe this is from Mary Menken, of how the idea of being, or a lot of filmmaker, I'm sure, that how the idea of, even my teacher Betsy Bomber too, like how you are really in one with your camera, like it's like extension body, and you're like feeling the whole thing that you're filming as a body. And then so that was that. But that's but then specific but for film that I almost specifically work with, I feel like I'm always still looking at the tactility and how that the details, like a lot of lighting details that capture on film that's actually I can make it like independently. Like, yeah, it just, yeah, it sounds, yeah, it's, I don't know, it's really like, I feel like sometimes filming on like analog film is like the most, it's actually more, a lot, I don't know, I don't want to say more affordable, but it's actually sometimes something that is very direct, that you are, a lot of things that you control with so little thing that you can have a really high quality images that it's capturing a lot of things that is beyond your limitation, I will say. Yeah.
I actually had the reaction that you mentioned, Erica, when there's sort of those focus shifts that happen with the flower or like sort of thistle in the foreground. I was like, oh, oh, how's that happening? I haven't seen
Thank
it
you.
before. There's something about how quick those focus shifts are happening that I was, I was like, how, how did they do that? That's amazing.
I can like reveal, I don't mind.
Don't reveal it on the Zoom. It's your proprietary technique, but
Yeah, I felt the same way, and I also felt that these techniques that were almost like structural in nature matched and seemed to come from the playful nature of the film itself and what you were um trying to, the connection with your grandma that you were making. And I feel like it was very delicate work, and it made me wonder about, if these you were playing with the camera. I'm not sure if you shoot on Bolex or not, but I automatically always say the Bolex. And if you were trying to shoot things that were toward making this film, or if you kind of you play around and you experiment separately, and then you use this kind of footage toward, or maybe a mix. It's probably a mix.
um I'm just quickly answer, but I want to like give the focus back to other people's film, because oh your films are amazing. But yeah, but it was actually, I was more like at the spot like filming. It wasn't like when I film it, it wasn't for the film, but it's like I was filming just, yeah, at kind of like just like recording, or like kind of like more a diary film as like way to like record this. So it's kind of like it kind of come back to me, and I kind of like, it's kind of like the footage that you put aside for a while and inspire you back, and then that trigger me to edit the film. So yeah, so and yeah.
I mean, I think that there's like, just like more broadly speaking about a communal relationship to like material, film and material. I think there's something about like transformation of texture, or like the building up of an image that's present in all of the works, as well as like material transformations that are happening to like subjects within the films. And I was interested to hear thoughts on that. Like, I keep thinking, Sean, of the shot of the ocean at the very beginning of your film, as it's kind of like moving through a very compressed space in slow motion, and how the image is kind of like building up in this very poetic sense. And I felt that in other aspects of like transforming the world into this material itself, whether shooting on digital or physical. And I was curious if people had thoughts on that in their works.
well, I would maybe just toss it right back in your direction and sort of ask you about your um, approach to these like LiDAR readings, or like the three, like using other lensing technologies, um, or other, sort of other eyes or imaging devices to sort of, create this phantasmagorical landscape of of nighttime Pittsburgh, you know, or like, so in a way, like, yeah, like transforming the expected image into an unexpected image. What was your approach there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it was like a twofold. I think I had a lot of questions on how to capture a place that I was like in but not from, as someone who grew up in New York and like has always felt very comfortable here with a camera. Going somewhere else and being like, oh, I want to make something that's kind of like a city symphony. Like, how do I do that as someone who's learning to be a part of something? And the thing that kept coming up for me was like these different aspects of like material transformation, like under the bigger umbrella of reanimation or like liveness, which has for me a relationship to cinema itself, like the act of being in a cinema or like that emulation of liveness that we all experience and like play with in our work. Um, so texture or like the relationship between micro and macro became a huge thing for me as to like how can I write a song to this place with and like capture without feeling exploitative of like recapturing a landscape that in particular that has been ravaged in so many ways and now is being like ravaged through this form of data mining. And I guess like I was very curious about this also in Tiff's film with these interstitial shots of the fire, like and this transforming relationship that we're also watching. I was curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I talk about a landscape being ravaged. The one of the summers that I was shooting was the summer of all those wildfires in California and the West Coast, US in general. And that fire was in the foothills near my house. The shot is from my backyard, and it's the fire that was the colloquially known as the gender reveal party fire. It was caused by like a pyrotechnic device. I think that like came out of a cake that was announcing the baby's gender at a gender reveal party. And it, you know, it burned acres of the land, and it kind of the way that I, in my mind, got it into the film was just this idea of like gender identity and formation that I really feel coming through in this home video footage that my dad shot of most of the clips in the film actually are of my sisters. There's only one shot of me as a baby. And just, you know, the tropes of playing dress up and things like that that kind of connected in this very psychological way to this fire and to kind of this destruction, but also starting over, renewal and birth and life and death and aging that I wanted the whole film to try to speak to. Yeah, so for sure that's in there.
This is one of the reasons we have conversations like this, because we might not have known that that fire was a result of a gender reveal party. And then, and it's just, it's a little, it's the context into which you made the movie, and it gives meaning to the home movie footage. It's not necessarily explicitly there, but in our conversation, we begin to understand actually how the artistic process works. I know that all of you do an enormous amount of reading. And Sean was mentioning Rachel Carson, but I'm curious to hear like the kind of texts or maybe other films that you were watching when you made this work that sort of maybe set you on your way, or or allowed you to see a methodology that kind of awakened you? Erica, you mentioned Betsy Bromberg as a presence in your life. I don't know if and I know her work very well, and we were talking about micro and macro. I don't know anybody who shoots more close up than Betsy Bromberg. You know, that's really like her trademark. But maybe, you know, and you mentioned Marie Menken. And so I was wondering if you all could talk about the work that sort of, I don't know, made you wanted to make films or are guides in your practice now.
I kind of want to start, but I also have a sidetrack question for everyone too. Okay, so my sidetrack question is because also Tim mentioned a little bit about camera as a defense, and I think I see in all of us film too as like I was very curious, like what were if you would talk about this like camera being confrontational, but also like a protection for yourself. So I think in over our film,
and we can come back to influences later. I like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I also, sorry. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just like totally thinking I'm blanking on somebody's name right now, but it'll come to me. But I think I could answer this and also open it up to the broader conversation of micro and macro, because I think we've both every film sort of addresses that interplay between like foreground and things going on in the background, is like, aside from like macro like photography and like looking at something very small, we've also like there's sort of this, especially with, I was thinking about it with Tiff's film in terms of her father's skin and then the smoke sort of in that like traditional background distance, and then in Rebecca's film, like thinking about the flesh of the zombie and the larger scopes, and then Erica's film, obviously, like the use of close focus, and so I think we could keep talking about that more, but what sort of inspired me in terms of thinking about things, both micro and macro, was a book that was written by a fellow New Yorker, written about the very same beach that I filmed on. This was it's a sociologist's perspective of the book Catch and Release by Lisa Jean Moore. And she's a sociologist that has written a number of really fascinating texts. And it was sort of like serendipity that I was able to access her book because I saw a flyer on a wall at Hunter College that said, like, book launch tonight, Lisa Jean Moore talking about Catch and Release, the life of horseshoe crabs on Plum Beach. And I was like, wait, what? That's like what I'm making my film about.
Wow.
And I had no idea of her work before, and I just sort of, I went, and turns out it was exactly what I needed, because she was bringing in perspectives that allowed me to then sort of translate them into visual techniques and things. So she was looking at Plum Beach as a site of specific study, and using things like actor network theory and bringing in Latour and looking at all these biotic and abiotic actors that work within this system of the beach, whether it's the tide, the sand, the exhaust from the cars on the Belt Parkway, the concrete, you know, the trees that hold the root systems together. Like, she was writing on a level that then allowed me to sort of rethink about the film. So I reached out to her, and she actually, her voice appears in the film, and she's talking about, we had a very long-ranging conversation, and we've since become friends. And there's a little snippet of her perspective in the film, looking at the way in which we've approached sort of climate resiliency in New York City, where it's briefly mentioned in the film, but it's not the point of the film really. But what she's getting at in this one soundbite moment is that after Hurricane Sandy destroyed the beach, there was real concern about the infrastructure of New York, that the Belt Parkway is sort of the main artery to JFK Airport, and that this thin strip of beach is sort of all that's protecting this like major human infrastructure. So then what the Army Corps of Engineers did is they decided they were going to bring in a denser, heavier sand that doesn't erode as fast as the natural sand on the beach. And so that process is called renourishing. There were studies that were done by Kingsborough Community College professors and students, particularly Professor Christina Colon, who appears in the film with her students, where they said, okay, let's study this sand and see its effect on the beach and on the spawn of the horseshoe crabs, which is, it's one of the most like kind of populous beaches where the crabs are spawning. And what they found is that the denser sand that is designed to protect human infrastructure is actually suffocating the crab eggs because there's not enough oxygen in the sand. So Lisa Jean, like her approach is thinking like, you know, we're trying to sort of tackle this massive object that is climate change, and we're doing all we can, but sometimes what it comes down to is that, like she says, like the individual grain of sand that we select for the beach can then have a ripple effect, can, you know, sacrifice or destroy one population, you know, in defense of another. And so it's sort of like when we're trying to weigh these options, sometimes it comes down to like the size of the grains of sand, and that just sort of is like the frustrating calculations that we're making as we think about like stewardship and, you know, trying to stave off catastrophe. And so speaking of catastrophe, that's like another word that I think we could talk about. I think Tiff's film is sort of like on this like precipice of catastrophe with this like looming fire. And I was just sort of like wondering if there's another thread. But let's maybe go back to the macro, micro, and book author inspirations that we were originally tasked with talking about.
Yeah, someone who I was reading who reminds me of some of the things that you were reading, Sean, is a book called The Life of Plants by an Italian philosopher, Emanuele Coccia. I'm probably butchering it. But there was this one passage that I think about so often, which is it's kind of a plant philosophy book, and he was talking about the development of life on land from life in the sea, and how we think about our life on land in the atmosphere of oxygen and carbon dioxide as being in the open, but actually it's not anymore in the open. We're as submerged in our own atmosphere on land as things are in the sea. And this idea alone kind of removed this boundary between land and sea, and I felt allowed me to kind of go into this aquatic zone with the tadpoles. That was also a primordial zone that allowed me to go toward birth and conception. And so that was huge. And that I was reading that through a class called sensory ethnography, which I was making a lot of this film in at Harvard, and those filmmakers, Lucian and Brenna, made Leviathan, and are kind of their approach to cinema is extremely courageous and kind of transgressive and confrontational which was making me brave, I think, as well, in my own approach. And it was also like Vertigo became like my favorite film ever, and there was like that kind of intensity of and kind of sickness of like Hitchcock's gaze, that he was just putting out there for all of us in this unashamed way. So it kind of made me brave toward kind of being maybe a little perverse in a way, which makes me think about Rebecca's film, because I think all of the films are also about withholding. In a way, like Sean, you withhold the images of the horseshoe crabs, I feel, for a while. And I'm like, I want to see horseshoe crabs. And then it goes like late, and then Rebecca, your film, it's almost like the genre trope of horror of giving us gore, but then it's a movie, so it's not real. And I think that your film really plays on this with the makeup of the gore, and that last great shot with the hand on the windshield and the wiping, and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like there's so many questions I want to ask you. I'm like, and a third detour question, but I'll try to weave it eloquently. Thank you, Tiff, for observing that. And I feel like the fun part of making this film was that I watched like every zombie film. Like I just binged on like horror film for 2 years. And it was something I always enjoyed, but it reformed my relationship to it. In a more I feel like I started seeing the genre as just like a medium to work within. And so yeah, I was watching a lot of that, and I was watching a lot of Haroon Farouki's works, which I think is very evident in like how I'm using surveillance data and like that kind of proxy eye that you mentioned, Sean. And I had read this essay called Why Zombies Matter, the Undead as a Critical Posthumanist, like this very kind of like academic essay, but it talked about how the zombie and the AI, like what makes a zombie and a cyborg sort of the same thing, and can we just think of the zombie as like after human rather than something like creature like or bad? Can the zombie just be a condition of us, of can we coexist? And so it's funny you point to the final shot, because I always call that like the zombie car high five, like the two zombies that carry on in this post-apocalyptic world. But yeah, I think like the act of withholding in all of the films appears for sure. And in my film, I think it's this question of like, there was so much research in the film that didn't wind up being a part of the film. And I think that's what creates the eeriness. Like I could have made a film about air pollution in Pittsburgh. I could have made a film explicitly about the steel industry, but instead there's like a very small hole through which I'm looking, which is like, how do all of these things tie to this element that's like personal to me? Because I felt like that was the story I could tell, like this one thread. I've seen so much media about this place and these different facets, but the unique lens I could provide was to withhold some of that information, which I felt was like not my story to tell, and to talk more about like this kind of hauntological relationship I was having with a director who I share this brief period of time with through an archive. And yeah, if we have time, I'd like to hear from you guys also about this, like spending time. I feel like all of the films are an excuse in a way to spend time with something that we're either drawn to or like have an aversion to, or like negotiate that relationship.
Actually,
I don't know.
that's
Yeah.
kind of what I was going to say. Something about this profound dedication that you all have to as we call the project, and then the project becomes a film, and then the film becomes a movie. And it's a long it's okay that it's a long, it's okay that Sean spent a year observing this community before he started shooting, or that there's so much reading that goes on that just helps you to understand your process. I mean, these are the kind of things that are always convincing me that I love filmmaking, because I do all of these things that allow me to feel immersed in my life, not just in the production, which is another kind of filmmaking, would be all about the production. And Tiff, you mentioned a word. I like this, that you said it made me brave. And I love that. I think that to be brave as an artist is like the adventure of, I called it introspection, like daring to follow that hunch. And so before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask each of you if you could say a bit about what you're doing now, because I think our audience would be interested. So if you could just say a bit about what you're exploring at this moment.
I'm working on an eco-horror film about a slag dump in Pittsburgh that is now a dead mall. So I feel like the themes continue.
That's very alliterative. That was a poem in itself. Yeah, so it will take you back to Pittsburgh. You haven't had enough.
I haven't had enough.
Yeah.
It's partially filmed already, so it's kind of ongoing.
Good, but the state of mind will continue, and it allows. Yeah. I also think that part of filmmaking is really so beautiful, that even as we are away from the place where we shot, it's in us because we're constantly looking at it. So we get to feel immersed in through the material. Could other people tell us about what you're doing or working on right now?
I'm trying to make a fiction short film. My mom is Taiwanese, so Erica, we should talk.
Oh.
And I had two relatives, a great grandfather and a great uncle, who were one was imprisoned and tortured and died under an imprisonment during the White Terror under martial law, and another who was imprisoned for 30 years, and he died immediately after being released. And this family history just felt too huge. You know, I'm like only half Taiwanese for me to tackle, and almost the way I had made films, kind of like with reality. But then I read about the murder of this expat journalist, kind of dissident journalist in San Francisco, named Henry Liu, by Taiwanese gangsters, triad members that the government had sent to California to assassinate him, and that they flew into Los Angeles first, and they drove to San Francisco to kill him. And I want to write this speculative road trip that they took up the Pacific Coast Highway.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. I love that. And
happy to help.
Yeah, if they're going up, they're on the right side. So I wonder who all the cars are going back watching them.
I'm kind of in the intersection of, okay, I make all this work and I need to like have time to like reflect and see what I'm doing for the next step. And actually I'm preparing my solo show, which I'm actually flying back to Taiwan tonight for a Lunar New Year vacation. And yeah, and I'm actually I've been with some friends. We have a collective called Rear Flags holds out in Taiwan. It's experimental film collective in Taiwan, and we've been hosting my screening based in Taiwan for 3-4 years now, and then this time would be my first in-person screening of my own like tiny retrospective in Taiwan. So yeah, I'm excited for that, and it's really meaningful too. Yeah.
So exciting that we get to talk with you right before you leave.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to meet all of you.
And I'm kicking around a few ideas for one is a longer project about spiders, and the other is a shorter project about clouds. And so that's all I have right now.
I love it. Those are good beginnings. Wow, this has been such a treat. We could go on. I wish I could have you all come over and have dinner here with me. And Erica, you need to tell us if you're on the East Coast so we can connect. I'm glad we have met in person at the Filmmakers
Yep.
Co.
Yes.
And it's just wonderful to be here, and I'm grateful to Cryptofiction for giving us this vessel for showing the work, and it should be up a few more weeks, and so I hope our audiences will dive in, and thank you to everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.